A man sits in a dimly lit room, his heart pounding as he listens to the voice on the other end of the phone. A kidnapper, cold and unyielding, demands a ransom. The stakes are life and death. But instead of panicking, the negotiator remains calm. He listens carefully, repeating back key phrases, mirroring emotions, making the kidnapper feel heard. Slowly, the conversation shifts. The kidnapper, expecting resistance or desperation, starts revealing more than he intended. The power dynamics shift, and what seemed like an impossible situation inches toward resolution. This is not a scene from a Hollywood thriller, but a real-life example of how negotiation, when done right, can turn even the most desperate circumstances into an opportunity for control and influence. While most of us may never find ourselves facing a hostage crisis, we negotiate every day. We negotiate salaries, business deals, relationships, and even everyday disagreements. Yet most people approach negotiations the wrong way, either by trying to overpower the other party or by rushing to a compromise that leaves value on the table. The book dismantles these flawed approaches and introduces a radically different strategy, one that hinges on emotional intelligence, tactical empathy, and psychological nuance. Negotiation is not just about what you say, it's about how you make the other party feel. And in the first chapter, we are introduced to the cornerstone of this philosophy: why no is the best word you can hear in a negotiation. Most people fear hearing the word no. It feels like rejection, like a dead end. But what if no is actually where the real negotiation begins? Most traditional negotiation strategies teach that getting to yes as quickly as possible is the goal. Sales professionals are taught to ask questions that elicit small agreements, leading their prospects down a path of compliance. But real-world negotiations, especially high-stakes ones, don't work that way. People hate feeling pressured. They resist being manipulated. And when someone senses they are being cornered into saying yes, they instinctively put up walls. Instead of chasing agreement, great negotiators welcome no, because it gives the other person a sense of control. When someone says no, they feel like they've made a decision, that they're in the driver's seat. That's when their defenses drop, and real conversation can begin. A person who feels in control is far more likely to stay engaged in the discussion rather than shutting down or walking away. To illustrate this, the book recounts a powerful story from the FBI's hostage negotiation experience. A bank robbery had gone wrong, and the robbers were holed up inside with hostages. Standard tactics weren't working. The robbers weren't responding to demands or threats. But when the negotiator changed tactics and gave them permission to say no, everything shifted. Instead of pushing them toward a forced agreement, he asked questions like, would it be impossible for you to release one hostage? Or, would you be against talking more about what you need? These questions allowed the robbers to feel in control and opened the door to a more productive negotiation, eventually leading to a peaceful resolution. This principle applies far beyond hostage situations. Imagine negotiating a salary. Instead of saying, "Can we agree on a higher salary?" which pushes the employer toward an uncomfortable yes/no decision, one might ask, would it be ridiculous to discuss a higher number? This question lowers resistance, gives the employer control, and often leads to a more open conversation. Emotions drive every negotiation. While people like to think they make decisions rationally, the truth is that emotions play a far greater role than logic. Understanding and controlling emotions, both yours and the other party's, is the foundation of effective negotiation. The best negotiators don't rely on arguments, statistics, or brute logic. Instead, they use empathy as their primary tool to guide discussions and influence outcomes. One of the most powerful techniques in negotiation is something called tactical empathy. This isn't just about understanding how the other person feels, it's about making them feel understood. People want to be heard. They want to know that their concerns, fears, and frustrations are acknowledged. When someone feels heard, they become more open, more flexible, and less defensive. A striking example of this comes from a case where a man had barricaded himself inside his home with his family, threatening violence. The police had been trying to convince him to come out, but nothing worked. Then the negotiator on the case changed tactics. Instead of demanding compliance, he began labeling the man's emotions. He said things like, "It sounds like you're afraid that if you come out, things will get worse. And it seems like you feel no one understands you." These simple statements had a profound effect. The man, who had been hostile and aggressive, suddenly became calmer. His guard lowered, and within hours he surrendered peacefully. Labeling emotions is one of the most effective tools in tactical empathy. By verbally identifying what the other person is feeling without judgment, you validate their emotions and help them feel understood. This doesn't mean agreeing with them. It just means acknowledging their perspective. Statements like, "It sounds like you're frustrated about the budget limitations," or "It seems like you're concerned about the timeline," can disarm tension and make the other party more receptive to collaboration. Another crucial element of tactical empathy is mirroring. People are naturally drawn to those who reflect their words and mannerisms. Mirroring is the simple act of repeating the last few words the other person said with an inquisitive tone. For example, if someone says, "I just don't think we have the budget for this," a skilled negotiator might respond with, "The budget is a concern." This subtle technique encourages the other party to expand on their thoughts, giving you more information to work with. In business, sales, and even personal relationships, tactical empathy can turn difficult conversations into cooperative discussions. When you acknowledge and label emotions, the person across the table feels less like an opponent and more like a partner. And once that shift happens, true negotiation begins. Negotiation isn't just about talking, it's about listening. But not just any kind of listening. It's about listening with intention. The best negotiators listen for what's unsaid as much as for what is spoken. They use silence strategically, allowing the other person to reveal more information than they intended. Most people feel uncomfortable with silence, so when you pause, they often rush to fill the gap. This is where key insights emerge. A powerful tool in active listening is the calibrated question. Unlike direct yes or no questions, calibrated questions are open-ended and designed to make the other party think and engage with the problem rather than resist it. These questions often start with how or what, forcing the other person to offer solutions instead of putting up barriers. For example, instead of saying, "Can you lower the price?" which invites a simple no, you might ask, "How can we work together to make this fit our budget?" This shifts the dynamic, making the other person feel like a problem solver rather than a roadblock. A compelling example of this comes from a case where a businessman was negotiating with a supplier who was refusing to budge on costs. Instead of pushing aggressively, he used a calibrated question. "What's the biggest challenge in reducing costs on your end?" The supplier, instead of shutting the conversation down, opened up about their own constraints, rising labor costs, material shortages, and logistics issues. With this information, the businessman found ways to offer solutions, such as adjusting the order size and delivery schedule. The result? A deal that worked for both parties, without unnecessary confrontation. Calibrated questions also diffuse tension. In high-stakes situations, emotions run high and people can become defensive. Instead of escalating a conflict, a simple, "How am I supposed to do that?" can shift responsibility back onto the other party, forcing them to see things from your perspective. This is particularly effective in salary negotiations, contract discussions, or even everyday disagreements. Another critical tactic in this approach is the concept of the illusion of control. People like to feel in charge of decisions, even when they're being guided in a particular direction. Calibrated questions create the illusion that the other party is in control of the negotiation, when, in reality, you are steering the conversation toward your desired outcome. The key is to ask questions that prompt the other person to come up with the very solution you want. By listening more than speaking, asking the right questions, and strategically using silence, the best negotiators gain the upper hand without ever seeming aggressive. They guide conversations toward their goals while making the other party feel like they arrived there on their own. This creates lasting agreements based on cooperation, not coercion. In high-stakes situations, people often reach an impasse because they fear losing something. That's why it's crucial to use loss aversion to your advantage. People are wired to avoid losses more than they seek equivalent gains. If you frame your offer as preventing a loss rather than gaining a benefit, it becomes significantly more persuasive. Instead of saying, "If you accept this deal, you'll gain X," reframe it as, "If you don't take this deal, you'll miss out on X." A great real-world example of using loss aversion in negotiation comes from Chris Voss's experience as an FBI hostage negotiator. In one case, a group of kidnappers in the Philippines had taken an American businessman hostage and demanded a huge ransom. The victim's family was terrified and willing to pay, but Voss and his team knew that simply agreeing to the demands would encourage more kidnappings. Instead of negotiating from a position of desperation, they reframed the conversation by leveraging loss aversion. Rather than saying, "If you release him now, you'll get the money," which framed the ransom as a gain, they flipped the script. "If this drags on too long, the authorities will shut down all options for you to get paid, and you'll be left with nothing." This shifted the kidnappers' mindset. They weren't just thinking about how much they could gain anymore. They started worrying about what they might lose if they didn't act quickly. The fear of getting nothing at all was stronger than the lure of a higher ransom. The pressure turned on them instead of the negotiators. Eventually, they lowered their demands, and the hostage was freed without the family paying an exorbitant amount. This same principle works in business, sales, and everyday negotiations. A car salesperson, for example, might tell a hesitant buyer, "This is the last unit at this price, and once it's gone, it's gone." Suddenly, the fear of missing out becomes a stronger motivator than the desire to negotiate a lower price. Another essential tool is the accusation audit. Before a difficult conversation, anticipate the worst things the other person might think about you and address them up front. By saying, "I know you might think I'm being unfair," you take the sting out of their objections before they can voice them, making them less likely to hold on to those negative thoughts. This disarms hostility and makes the other party more receptive. Deadlines are another common negotiation tool, but they are often arbitrary and used to create pressure. Smart negotiators know that most deadlines are flexible and should not be taken at face value. Instead of rushing into a deal under pressure, ask clarifying questions about the deadline's significance. Often you'll find that it's not as rigid as it seems, giving you more time to maneuver. For instance, in high-stakes business deals, sales representatives frequently claim that a discount or offer expires by the end of the day or week. This creates a sense of urgency, pushing the buyer to act quickly. However, experienced negotiators recognize this as a psychological tactic and counter it by asking, "What happens if we finalize this next week instead?" Or, "Is this deadline tied to an internal quota?" These questions force the other party to reveal whether the deadline is genuine or just a sales ploy. In many cases, it turns out the deal is still available after the deadline has passed, proving that it was merely an artificial constraint designed to force a rushed decision. By questioning deadlines rather than blindly accepting them, negotiators regain control, allowing them to make more informed, strategic decisions rather than succumbing to pressure tactics. Finally, effective negotiation isn't just about winning one deal, it's about building long-term relationships. The best negotiators leave their counterparts feeling satisfied, even when they've made significant concessions. When people feel good about a deal, they are more likely to engage again in the future, which leads to better opportunities down the line. In conclusion, mastering negotiation is about psychology, patience, and precision. It's about guiding conversations with subtle influence rather than force. The most successful negotiators don't split the difference. They shape the conversation so that the other side willingly moves closer to their position. By listening more than speaking, asking the right questions, and creating an environment where the other party feels like they are in control, you can achieve the best outcomes without ever having to compromise in ways that hurt your interests. Thank you so much for listening and joining us. If you enjoy the audiobook, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more book summaries that can expand your mind. Drop a comment below to let us know which book you like us to explore next. We look forward to bringing you more valuable contents right here on Page by Page. Until next time, keep learning and growing.